Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today, we are wrestling with a document that, honestly, it holds a really confounding position in the history of revolutionary politics. It's Paul Lafargue's 1883 treatise, The Right to be Lazy.
And this isn't just some obscure footnote either. You have to understand, this text is a foundational classic of socialist thought. And it was written by the man who was Karl Marx's son-in-law.
Right, and it has this really shocking distinction of being one of the most translated revolutionary works out there. I mean, some say it's second only to the Communist Manifesto.
And that status alone is massive. But here's the unbelievable context that really frames our deep dive today. Vladimir Lenin himself claimed that this argument, an argument for laziness, had a major influence on the intellectual shaping of the 1917 October Revolution.
Which creates an immediate and just a profound paradox, doesn't it? We're so used to socialist doctrine glorifying the dignity of labor, the necessity of it.
Exactly. But here's Lafargue, right at the heart of the Marx family, actively rejecting that entire idea. So our mission is to figure out how he built this radical, this uncompromising critique of what he called the capitalist dogma of work. And, why he saw refusal, not production, as the real path to liberation.
Okay, let's unpack this. And I think the best place to start is with the architect of the critique himself, Paul Lafargue. His love story is it's as complex and as international as his ideas. He was born in Santiago, Cuba in 1842.
And his lineage was just incredibly mixed. It really reflects this truly global background, which you can see shaping his thinking later on.
What do the sources say about his ancestry?
Well, they detail a French grandfather, a grandmother of both black and white descent, a French-Jewish maternal grandfather, and then a Caribbean indigenous grandmother. So he was, quite literally a man of multiple worlds. And that might explain his later fierce internationalism, his detachment from those strict European nationalistic views.
So he moves to France, he pursues medical studies in Paris, and he gets immersed in radical student politics pretty quickly. This is the 1860s. He was a militant Republican, a materialist, a staunch atheist. But his ideology, it wasn't static.
No, not at all. His intellectual journey is like a map of 19th century radicalism. He starts out as a predonist, which, is an early form of anarchism, workers' co-ops, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But then he shifts, and it's a dramatic shift, toward scientific socialism. He's reading Kant, Hegel, Darwin, Feuerbach.
And then comes the pivotal moment. He meets Karl Marx in 1865. And he was apparently very impressive. I think Engels described him as handsome, intelligent, energetic, and sporty.
Yes. And by 1867, he's married to Marx's daughter, Laura. He's in the family.
And this connection, it obviously deepens his commitment, but it was a personal tragedy that seems to have just solidified his rejection of the entire establishment.
A heartbreaking story. After they settled in Paris, they had 3 children between 1868 and 1871. And all 3 died in early childhood.
Oh.
Yeah. And this crushing loss, it appears to have just completely shattered his faith in his medical career.
So he abandons medicine.
Absolutely.
And dedicates himself, alongside Laura, to socialist thought and action. It's this powerful moment of turning away from the conventional world of, doing something, and toward the radical world of thinking and fighting.
And that sense of radical clarity, it followed him right to the very end. In 1911, he and Laura committed suicide together.
His suicide letter is incredibly chilling, but it's also so reflective of his principles.
It is. He specifically stated he did it to avoid what he called the merciless old age that would strip him of his powers and make him a burden. He chose to die while still physically and mentally sound. It's a perfect, if tragic, echo of his views on labor and life's utility.
And that deep personal rejection of degradation, that seems to be the engine behind this essay. Now, when you hear the title, The Right to be Lazy, the immediate assumption is, well, he's just advocating for idleness.
Right, but we have to clarify what he meant by laziness.
It's not about being unproductive. He's fighting against what he called a strange madness, this idea of excessive labor.
Exactly. And you have to understand, this is partly a translation issue, but it's also rooted in the historical context of the Industrial Revolution. For instance, in some translations, like the Turkish one, scholars often suggest replacing the word for laziness with the phrase for leisure time.
Ah, so bush zaman.
Precisely. That really captures the core demand, the right to rest, to reflection, to a life outside of the factory. He was targeting the relentless, just the soul-crushing pace of 19th century industry.
And he used history, even linguistics, to frame this argument. It's fascinating that the French word for work, travail, has such a heavy negative history.
It really does. Travail historically carries these meanings of, painful work, torture, even labor in the sense of childbirth. And this negativity, Lafargue pointed out, was standard in antiquity. In ancient Athens, labor was seen as a vile activity. It was for slaves.
Right. Free men were supposed to engage in intellectual games, in civic life. It was about movement, not manufacturing.
And the big philosophers, Plato, Aristotle, they saw labor as fundamentally degrading to a free man. Aristotle was so committed to this idea that he literally dreamed of machines, of mechanical tools that would take over the work of slaves, freeing citizens for higher pursuits.
And Lafargue doesn't stop with the Greeks. He takes this thread right into their religious realm.
He does. He points out that even the biblical foundation discourages excessive toil. Think about the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus advises a kind of idleness. Look at the lilies of the field. They neither toil nor spin. Even God, he argues, set the highest moral example by resting for eternity after 6 days of work.
So if history, philosophy, and religion all had this ingrained skepticism towards endless work, how did the West, specifically the capitalist West, manage to flip that script? How did they impose the glorification of work as a virtue?
It was a very conscious moral maneuver. And this is where he brings in figures like Adolphe Thiers, a key conservative politician in France. Lafargue quotes Thiers from 1849, advocating for strengthening the clergy. Why? Specifically because they preached the good philosophy that man is meant to suffer in this world.
Wow, so religion becomes a tool, a moral brake, as he put it, on the working class.
A highly effective one. It ensured they remained docile, that they accepted their suffering as, God's will. The goal wasn't just exploitation, it was psychological subjugation, making the worker into a self-policing machine who believes relentless labor is a moral duty.
And that leads us right to his core thesis, the devastating human cost of all this.
This is it. Lafargue argued that by embracing this dogma of work, the working class had betrayed its own mission. And the result wasn't just poverty. It was, in his words, intellectual degradation and organic disorders caused by working too much.
And this is where the source material provides just sickening data that backs him up. We're talking about Dr. Villermai's 1840 report on the factories in Alsace, specifically in Mulhouse. The conditions are, they're almost unimaginable today.
They're horrifying. The report documents workers enduring 16 hours of labor a day. 16 hours.
Let's put that in context.
Okay, so the source notes that even galley slaves were typically forced to work only about 6 hours. Slaves in the Antilles, 9 hours. So industrial laborers were working almost twice the hours of a chattel slave.
And it wasn't just adults. This torture, as he calls it, was being imposed on children as young as 6 or 8 years old.
The devastation was complete. Villermay described families living in extreme poverty. Sometimes you'd have 2 families sleeping on straw laid between 2 boards. And the mortality rates. Just look at the mortality rates.
This is the part that's just staggering.
Half of the children from weaving and spinning families died before the age of 21. Meanwhile, half of the factory owners' children, in stark contrast, survived past 21.
So the industrial system was literally selecting for death among the working class. It's just devastating. And yet, and this is the crazy part, the workers demanded more of the same.
That's the ultimate paradox. That's the disgrace Lafargue identified. The workers in 1848, what were they demanding? The right to work. He called this a plea only a slave would make, begging for the very chains that were killing them. And by doing so, they not only submitted themselves, but they actively delivered their wives and children to the factories, destroying the family unit for the sake of production.
Which brings us to the economic consequences of this madness. If everyone is working themselves to death, you get the ultimate capitalist crisis.
Right.
Overproduction.
Exactly. They produce so relentlessly that the market becomes saturated. No one can buy the surplus, so factories close. The ultimate result of all this excessive work is mass unemployment and starvation. Their suffering triggers their own misery over and over again.
So the problem for the capitalists completely flips. It's no longer about finding people to produce things. They've got that covered. The crisis becomes about consumption. It's about, as Lafargue put it, finding consumers and, crucially, creating needs.
And this drove these bizarre and destructive economic behaviors. Manufacturers started looking for consumers abroad, which forced governments into brutal colonialism, dumping surplus goods in places like the Congo and Tonkin because the home market couldn't absorb them.
And at home, they had to ensure constant demand, a lot of the time through basically deliberate sabotage of their own products. Lafargue talks about things like adding mineral salts to silk fibers just to increase the weight, which made them brittle and prone to breaking. Products were built to fail.
He called this the age of counterfeiters, a damning label. And what's more, the wealthy class was forced into its own version of excessive consumption and unproductive labor just to absorb all the surplus capital. I mean, think of the sheer number of servants, 1.2 million in England and Wales in 1861, all employed in these non-productive luxury roles.
So the rich are forced to spend endlessly just to keep the machine from seizing up. It's a high-consumption version of pointless labor to subsidize a broken production model.
That's the paradox,
Yeah.
which brings us to his solution. If the machine is the problem,
It must also be the solution, just like the ancients dreamed.
that's his philosophical twist. He quotes the Greek poet Antiparos, who celebrated the invention of the watermill. He thought it would free slave women, bring back a golden age of leisure. But Lafargue says the machine, the intended liberator, was perverted. It was turned into a tool to enslave free men through even more intensive overwork.
Which brings us to his revolutionary proposal. He doesn't want gradual reform, not better wages. He demands a total societal shift.
His solution is very specific, and it's non-negotiable. The working class must demand a steel-like, unbreakable law, forbidding anyone from working more than 3 hours a day.
Okay, wait a minute. 3 hours a day? That sounds, completely utopian, impractical. Wouldn't that just collapse production instantly?
He actually addressed that criticism head-on. He claimed that reducing hours increased efficiency and national strength. This wasn't just idealism. He cited empirical evidence from his own era to back it up.
What kind of evidence? Because that flies in the face of conventional economics.
Well, he pointed to an Alsatian manufacturer, a guy named Borkar, who found that his production volume actually went up when he cut work hours from 12 to 11. And then there's the bigger example, the English government. They ignored the economists and imposed a 10-hour day.
And what happened?
England remained the world's leading industrial nation. Productivity, because of rest and innovation, actually increased over time.
That's a powerful argument. Less time working forces everyone, laborer and owner, to be more efficient. It drives innovation.
Precisely. And if you enforce a 3-hour day, he says, massive unemployment of unnecessary labor is inevitable. This then forces society to create a new way of living. It forces the current non-working class, soldiers, judges, economists, to take up useful labor or find other productive ways to be occupied. For Lafargue, the ultimate goal isn't more production, it's human liberation. The machine is the god that gives humanity leisure and liberty.
What stands out here is how completely he inverts the standard socialist ideal. The worker's mission is not to produce, it's to refuse to work excessively and instead maximize their own consumption and leisure.
That's his central thesis, really, to summarize it. The worker must shed the moral chains of the work ethic, consume more, and demand leisure. By refusing to participate in overproduction, they force capitalism to innovate, to raise wages, and ultimately to liberate humanity from the vileness of wage labor itself.
And finally, let's go back to that provocative vision he had for the future. Once the 3-hour day was implemented, he had some very specific ideas about what to do with the people who had enforced the work dogma.
Yes, he imagined a kind of societal retribution against the formerly unproductive elite. People like lawyers, clergymen, economists, the ones who preached the morality of suffering. They would be assigned demeaning or utterly pointless physical labor as punishment for their moral failures.
Like what?
He suggests making them crank giant wheels for 10 hours straight, or compelling senators to carry coffins at funerals. It's a total, almost brutal inversion of social dignity.
It is. It's a profound challenge to our whole modern conception of status and utility. So the question for you to think about is this. What stands out to you in this vision of a radically changed society? A society where the roles of the useful and the unproductive are completely flipped on their head. It really challenges every assumption we still hold today about labor, about duty, about what defines a meaningful life outside of work.